Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the World IA Cafe Speaker Series. Thank you for joining in today. We have an excellent webinar, and I'm sure you will immensely enjoy it. My name is Rupa Mishra. I'm an associate professor at Rutgers University. I manage and teach in the user experience design and product design concentrations in the MBS program. I'm also an active member of World IA Association. The topic for today's webinar is integrating accessibility into the product making for more inclusive products. I love this topic. It's so relevant in today's world. And the speaker for this interactive event is Nandita Gupta. I love her name as well. Beautiful name. Nandita is an accessibility product manager at Microsoft, where she works on product that empowers users to create inclusive and accessible experiences for all users. She's on the board of many organizations and has given presentations at various venues. She has a lot of accomplishments. Let me share her LinkedIn profile link in the chat. Our chat. Okay. Also, I would like you to know that we'll be recording all the speakers in this World IA Cafe series. The videos will be available on World IA's website. Let me share that as well, the website link. It's a great organization to network and meet people from all over the world. If you are interested, then please join the organization. We are looking for volunteers as well. Every year we host the World IA Day, and this has been going on since 2012. The format of this cafe speaker series is this: 45 to 50 minutes would be the talk, followed by 10 minutes Q&A. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask your questions. Also, I would like to remind you, this is an excellent opportunity to network with one another. If you like, you can share your LinkedIn profile link in the chat. Let me put mine. I will also share with you my department's website link if anyone is interested in our UX of Product Design Master's programs. Okay. So enjoy the webinar today, and now over to Nandita.
Awesome. Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. Am I audible? Can everyone hear me? Awesome. I'm also going to attempt to share my screen. I always say attempt because I've been having a day of tech issues. So I'm praying that this isn't one of them. Is my screen visible right now? Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up. Great. Awesome. And I am also going to try and set up the chat real quick so I can see the chat while we keep going on the side. So yeah, if there's any questions, comments, I have my eye on the chat as well. So please let me know. I know we have the Q&A section in the end, but I will also try to create space for questions as we go along. So that will be my hope. But yeah, like jumping in, hi everyone again. My name is Nandita Gupta. My pronouns are she, her, and I work at Microsoft as an accessibility product manager. Fun fact about me, I am a trained dancer, so I also teach dancing on the side, and I also have a first degree black belt in Wing Chun. So I also practice martial arts. So that is my other passion other than accessibility, but very, very excited to be here today. Again, in the spirit of what we just heard, with this is about making connections. To me, this is also about learning. You know, I'm going to learn a lot from you all as we go through this as well. So if we can quickly in the chat throw in, I know we've talked about introductions, right? But I'd love to hear, just add your name, where you're from, and tell me one thing that you're excited about learning today. What is one thing that you're like, hey, I'm curious about this, so here's why I'm here. I'd just love to hear from the group. So giving everyone a few minutes, again, feel free to add that in the chat. And while we're doing that, I guess I have another question. Does anyone know what? So on my screen, I have this weird looking
Indeed.
machine.
Yeah, just gonna do this.
Also, I will request you all to mute yourselves if you're not asking a question, just for the interest of disruptions. Thank you all. Awesome. So while I'm waiting on the chat, would again love to know your name and where and what, why you're here. On my screen, I have a device which has also a human ear as part of it. I'm curious, can anyone identify what device this is? What do I have on my screen? I'll give everyone a second to think about this one.
It looks like some old pseudoscience device trying to get thoughts from corpses.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Hugo, that was extremely, I like that. I like that. Very close, very close. So we are actually, so we're looking at what they say a phonautograph, if I can say that right. And this was actually created by Alexander Graham Bell in 1874. And this was a device that allowed deaf students to see the vibrations of sound etched onto smoke glass. And this invention used a really unusual component, and Hugo, you hit on that. It used a ear from a dead body. And what's really interesting and fascinating about this is the work that really paved the pathway for Bell to invent the telephone 2 years later. This invention, when you think about a telephone, right? We use mobile phones today, telephones, what have you. We use this every single day. It's such an important part of our lives. This actually started from an accessibility need. So Alexander Graham Bell is, he's well known for inventing the telephone. A lesser known fact is he actually came to the United States as a teacher for the deaf community, and he conceived the idea of electronic speech when he was visiting his mother who was hearing impaired in Canada. And this led him to invent the microphone and then later the electrical speech machine, which was the first name for the telephone. So think about this really fascinating invention, innovation that really came out of the need from an accessibility space. Another example, we think about audiobooks. So audiobooks were actually one of the first applications, of phonographic when it was invented in 1877. So actually Thomas Edison said that, they could, quote unquote, speak to blind people without effort on their part. And talking books honestly weren't as pervasive back then, but they became more widely used in the 1930s. And they were distributed to veterans who were wounded in the First World War. And it's really until 1980s where they became more mainstream. And today, I mean, so many of us, I personally use Audible, right, which has become super mainstream, right? Listening to audiobooks, listening to podcasts, things like that. And it isn't just about folks who could, don't see the books or don't read the books. It's about people who prefer to ingest the information in a different way, right? That's all it is. And so really, again, taking a step back, my goal for you today is I would love for everyone to start thinking about, whether it's information architecture, because we're here for World IE Day, right? But really forming the basis of how we look at product making, right? How we look at how we are designing and building products and thinking about the problems we are solving, right? Let me even remove the word products. I want us all and challenge all of you on the call to think of how you solve products and solve problems with a different lens, and really taking on the lens of accessibility and inclusion on how we can solve problems for more people. So that's my goal. If there's one thing you take away from today, is walk away with one thing that you're going to try. And I'm going to ask you this towards the end. So hint, just letting you all know. Also loving the messages coming in, keep them going. So really amazing to see everyone who's again excited to be here. And again, thank you for sharing. Truly, truly appreciate it. And so jumping in, this is going to be an exercise I'm going to go back to. I just like I'm a very hands-on person, and I like having the guide rails of a very specific issue that we can think of. If you have a different issue you want to solve, think of that, visualize that, write it down, right? Think of this like a mini workshop. So in this case, the prompt that I've given everyone is, with everything that went on with COVID-19, right? What kind of a video conferencing tool would you create? right? So now that we've all had this experience of going through the pandemic, where we live in a hybrid world, some people are going back in person, some people are still remote. What does that look like? What does a new video conferencing tool look like? And if you were the designer or the developer or whoever you are in charge of what you do in your day-to-day lives to contribute to something like this, what would you do? So I'm just going to ask, I guess, please use the chat. I'd love to see the chat because then everyone can respond and we're not worried about that. So I'd love to see you all share in the chat. Share one feature that you think could be valuable in today's hybrid world. What is something that could be interesting, or something that you need, or something from a need that you've seen? I'll throw in mine. And it could be a feature you use today, and that's fine. Okay, I love it. Francis says, prevent Zoom from updating at the last minute when you try to rush into the call. Oh my gosh, yes, I need that. Inclusion of XR, captioning, I love that. I think we have the recording on. We do have captions for this call if someone needed it. I do want to throw that out there. So it's under more and captions. So if you need that, please do turn that on. I love it. Closed captioning, transcriptions, amazing. Screen readers, ability record, sign language animations. I love that. Okay, so we're starting to get our creative juices flowing, right? So we're thinking about this. And I'm seeing Siri would be good, Alexa would be good, right? To be able to just say, hey, I'm on this call, schedule this meeting. We just had this discussion, right? So that's great. Awesome. So while we're thinking about these, I'm gonna keep that in mind, right? Keep all the features you thought of in mind, because we're gonna expand on that. When we think about inclusive design, and I'll touch back on accessibility as well, we tend to, and this is a very natural bias, I do this too, we tend to generate and evaluate ideas based on what we know, what we've experienced, or the people around us have experienced. So if we end up creating experiences or solving the problems that work well, with a few people, that work for a few people, and use our abilities as a baseline, we're going to make things really easy for people who look like us, who speak like us, who are basically similar to us. But there's 8 billion people in the world, and we might be excluding chunks, right? We might be excluding a lot more people who don't think like us, who don't function like we do, right? And so our goal really is to take a step back and say, how can I create products and experiences that are physically, cognitively, emotionally appropriate for everyone, right? How can I really start to see human diversity as a resource for better designs, right? How can I maybe use that as a constraint? And so again, when we think about this, that's when exclusions happen, right? Because when it comes to people, there's really no such thing as normal, right? The interactions we design really just depend heavily on what we can see, what we can touch, what we can hear, right? And making the assumption that all those abilities are turned on for everyone and are fully functional and enabled for everyone is a huge bias, right? It creates this potential to ignore a much needed range of the human diversity. So again, when we're thinking about designing for inclusivity and, with accessibility really specifically going into thinking about how are we making sure products and experiences are being designed with people with disabilities in mind, we're really going to start going towards a wider range of experiences. So I'm going to start with different phases. When I'm thinking about product design or the overall product lifecycle, I almost break that down into, this is a very simplistic breakdown, but I know we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to break it down into 3 phases. One is the research phase, the user experience research, where you're exploring, what the problem is, then kind of going into the design phase, and then kind of touching on the implementation phase, which is more development. And would love to share some tips and tricks that have worked for me. But remember, we're all in this learning together. And I think you all are going to generate ideas and share with everyone on this call things that could work. So this is going to be about learning and learning from each and every one of us. So diving into user research. And what user research is, it's just focusing on understanding user behaviors and really understanding your customers, right? So if I've got a mason jar, and on the screen right now in my video, I'm holding up a mason jar with some tea. It is made of glass, so it's fairly heavy, right? So thinking about who's my user, I'm not going to give this to a child because they might drop it. It's heavy. They might break it. Glass issues, right? So you start thinking about who's your user, how are they going to use it, what are they going to use it for, and how can you start poking holes in that so you can make your products better or your experiences better. And again, we touched a little bit on inclusive design, but kind of wanted to bring this back. Again, inclusive design, accessibility, two different things. Inclusive design is taking a step back and saying, I want to be able to draw on the full range of human diversity and learn from people and include people with a wide range of perspectives. And this not just touches on disabilities, it touches on language, it touches on culture, it touches on race, it touches on age, right? It touches on literacy, it touches on financial literacy, it touches on economics. So there's a lot of different areas that it can go into. And I know I was seeing some comments in the chat around translations and reactions, right? Translate in a different language, things like that. So again, that they're really starting to touch inclusive design, which is great. Web accessibility or accessibility, when we talk about that, means are we creating experiences, and digital accessibility specifically? Are we making sure we are creating digital experiences that are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them? And so I'll be touching, while I talk a lot about inclusive design, I'll be giving you examples to do with accessibility. I just wanted to make sure that that difference in those two is clear. But we're going to make sure we can bring more people into the conversation. That's the goal of today. So jumping in, right, we're starting to talk about research, and we're starting to talk about how do we make sure in the inception of any product or experience, we're making sure we're being inclusive. And the first step of that is recognizing where exclusion is happening. So the moment the World Health Organization first published its formal definitions of disabilities, this was 1980, there was a difference in the understanding of what disability was then and what it's today. Earlier, they complied to the medical model of disability. And today, as of 2001, they changed it to make it a more social model, to say that disability happens at the interactions between people and society. So today, when we think about that, we really think about that as a mismatch, right? It's a mismatch. So disability is, again, context dependent. It's not a health problem. It's not a medical problem. It's basically the interaction between the person's body and the experiences around them. And so it's not got anything to do with the person. It's got everything to do with the environment that they're in. The environment is what enables or disables someone. And so that's why it's our responsibility, whether you're a designer, you're a developer, you're a researcher, whatever you do in tech or whatever your role is, there is something you can do every single day to make sure we are all building an inclusive world together. And thinking about, again, this being a mismatched interaction, again, not a personal health condition, it's a mismatched human interaction. One of my favorite examples with this is being left-handed and being right-handed. How many left-handed folks on this call here today? I'm putting my hand up because I was born left-handed, but I was forced to write with my right hand. Completely different story. I'm not getting into that today. But how many left-handed folks on the call here today? And you can just say me. Okay, I'm seeing some raised hands. That's great. That's great. Okay, there's at least one. Thank God. Okay, I see Chuck put his hand up. Okay, I see Grace put a hand up. Nice. And yeah, feel free to use the chat as well. Have any of you all ever experienced those L-shaped right-handed desks where you had to kind of, scooch over and try to write, and it just wasn't designed for you? And then everyone else was fine. They were just like, yeah, I can write. This is fine. I can be comfortable. Whereas, at least for me, I was hunched over trying to use it because it almost felt like I was covering my work. It's like, no, don't cheat. Don't see what I'm doing. It was weird. It was awkward. It was uncomfortable. For a while, I thought something was wrong with me. It's like, why does everyone write with the right and I'm writing with the left? That is actually a good example of a disability. There's nothing wrong with us for being born left-handed. There's nothing wrong with us for writing with the left hand, but the desk is what disabled us in that moment. It was nothing to do with you. It was everything to do with the environment, right? And so if you think about this, in what we design and develop every single day, we might be introducing some exclusions that might disable someone else. And now left and right-handed is more permanent, right? We think about it like, hey, you write with your left hand, you just write with your left hand. It's a fact. Disability can also be temporary and situational. So one example I have, and on my screen, I have two images. One image of someone holding up a book, a physical book, with a beautiful water in the background. And on the left-hand side, I've got someone holding up a Kindle paperback. Seems like they're in a coffee shop. There's a coffee cup in the background. This is a very interesting example of a temporary or a situational exclusion. So for example, not being able to read a book in bright sunlight, right? In this case, it's a very situational disability, because if someone takes this book and goes somewhere else, they're going to be fine. They just couldn't there, right? And so as you move through environments, your abilities change. They change dramatically. And so this is another example, right? You think about when you're doing this user research, or you're talking to different people and your customers, as your situations change, their experiences with your products and the experiences and services you're building will change. So exclusions aren't always permanent. To say that, hey, I didn't design my website for someone who uses a screen reader, and so no one can use it, right? Like, it's also possible that there's an image, let's say there's an image you've thrown out there and you've not added alt text. Someone who uses a screen reader is not going to be able to access that image and experience the magic that you're trying to share through that infographic. Someone who's having a bad internet connection is probably not going to be able to see that image. And so if you added an alt text, they might have been able to see the alt text and still understand what you're saying, right? So those are some other examples of, it's the same exclusion, but someone's experiencing it from a temporary lens, someone's experiencing it from a situational lens. And that is really, really important, right? So the first one is recognize the exclusions. The second one is learn from this diversity, right? So when we think about accessibility and we think about inclusive design, making sure that you're putting people in the center of your experiences, right? Making sure you're talking to people, you're understanding, and what are some adaptations that they're doing that you can learn from, that you can kind of say that, hey, that's an insight. I wasn't expecting someone to use the product in this particular way, but oh, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe we should change that. It's going to save someone 5 clicks. Great, right? So learning from how people are using your product is super important, but also making sure you're learning from people with disabilities and interviewing them, making sure you have a wide, inclusive range of people you interview, right? And not just one particular sect, or that's kind of where the bias comes in, and it's very natural, it happens. And so again, thinking about how we can learn and really use the empathy to understand how people around us are adapting, right? Talking to them, observing them, all of that fun stuff. And this is where you get the insights. So when I say insight, people think it's an aha moment that's just going to come to you. You're going to sit in the middle, sit in a dark room, look up at the stars, or sit under the stars and be like, oh yeah, that's my aha moment. That's how I'm going to redesign. No, right? Go talk to people, go talk to your users. And we talk about peeling back layers. We talk about going beyond words. This is kind of where it gets interesting, right? So if you are able to get people with disabilities, you're able to get more inclusive group of people using your products and services, you're going to get a lot of insights on how to redesign something that's going to make it easier for everybody, right? And we actually call that the curb cut effect. And so it's one of those where, for example, captions, I saw captions come up. Netflix released this data, and don't quote me on this, but last I remember, before they ended up doing the captions, everyone assumes that, oh, captions are for someone who can't hear what's going on, or, it's for the deaf community. They released data where 80% of the users use captions. So 80% of the users. And so, I use captions. I put my hand up. I might be watching a movie and I'm not understanding the accent. And I love having the captions on. That way I don't lose out on the information. Sometimes there's too much noise going on in the background. I use the captions for that to make sure I'm still connected. Sometimes my internet connection isn't great. And so maybe I might not be able to audibly hear, but because I have captions or transcriptions turned on, I'm still able to keep up. And those are just 3 different cases of using the same feature, right? And this was really born out of an accessibility need. So this happened because someone interviewed someone and figured out that, hey, this was a need, we need to make sure we get this, right? And so think of how you can catch those insights and really go beyond what people are saying, right? Because there's a difference between what people say versus what they do versus how they actually behave and what's going on. So definitely learn from that. As we start to go beyond that, and again, when we talk about how to find these, make sure you're doing customer interviews, make sure you're talking to as many different type of people and you're observing them, right? Observation's really important. And it's a very interesting tool because again, someone might say something to you, but they might do something completely different. And once you notice that, you're like, oh, okay, you know what? I can change this. And my last point on this section, when we talk about even just research, we talk about opening up that lens. We say solve for one, extend to many, right? And what this really means is if you can start with solving one problem, right? Take the examples of captions. You might have solved it for one particular community, but now all of a sudden you've extended that to a lot more people. And so constraints can be really good, right? And that's how you can solve for one, extend to many. And so designing for people with disabilities, right? Designing with accessibility in mind might seem like a significant constraint, but the resulting designs can actually benefit a large number of people. There is a study that was done which said that products that were designed with people with disabilities in mind and with accessibility benefited 56% of those products that were designed with that benefited more people, right? It benefited everyone. It led to a higher adoption because when you solved for one, it extended to many. Right. In one example, you can see this, right? Again, we talked about captioning, but even when we talk about high contrast screen settings, right? Many people tend to use that, right? If you're outside in bright sunlight, you might want to change up the contrast so that it makes sense and it helps. I see Grace also said in the chat saying captions are helpful while watching the movies, right? Like a lot of whispering or the deeper tones. Love that. I know even Preeti mentioned that, while multitasking, she might be able to use captions for the movies. So that's really valuable. Nehar says that she gets mad at her right-handed mouse when she's having difficulty using it, and even background noise. Totally keep the examples coming. This is great, right? And this is exactly what I'm talking about. This isn't an unknown group that we are talking about. This is you and me. This affects each and every one of us. And even with disabilities, right? We're all going to experience some form of a disability in our lives, whether it's permanent, situational, or temporary. As we age, some things are going to work, some things are not going to work. How many of you all have ever had arm injuries? I remember having a rotator cuff injury where I couldn't even do daily tasks, right? Like I couldn't even pick up this mason jar with my right hand for a while because it was so painful. I couldn't cook for a while, right? And so going through those experiences also like, it hits you close to home. It's not something that's happening to someone over there. This is going to happen to you and me. This is going to happen to our parents. This is going to happen to our grandparents. And so do we really want to design a world that is not inclusive to us, that is not inclusive to the people we love, right? And so thinking about that, again, more people are going to benefit. There's a lot of good math and statistics out there. I'm not going to bore you with that. But really thinking about the whole solve for one, extend to many, how that's going to work, right? How can we really move that forward? I think updated numbers today, honestly, 1 in 4 people in the United States identify with some form of a disability. 1 in 4. It's 25%. That's not a small 2-3%. That is a major chunk of the population, right? So it's going to affect a lot of us. And so on my screen, I now have an image that showcases touch, see, hear, and speak. So the different senses. And it showcases permanent, temporary, and situational exclusions or situational disabilities. Let's take the example of speak, right? So you may have someone who is nonverbal, someone who's not saying, that's a permanent disability. You may have someone who's going through a temporary one with, having a cough or being sick, or in some cases also having a heavy accent. Like in some cases, I do have a slight accent. I am an Indian woman, so yes, that happens. But sometimes there are some people who may not be able to understand me, right? And in that case, it's like, oh, wait, okay, let me make sure I have my captions on, or people are able to understand what I'm saying. Another example of this is when we're thinking of hearing, right? We talked about captions. You can extend captions to someone, someone who's deaf, they might need captions. Someone who may have a ear infection and so temporarily cannot hear, or someone who's a bartender, or if you're in an airport, a very noisy airport, and you're trying to, be a part of a call, wouldn't it be great to just have captions so you can make sure what they're saying instead of going, huh? Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that again? And the other person's just like, let's just talk later. I'm done with this conversation, right? And so think of all these different cases where it's going to extend to a lot more people. So when you're thinking about designing with accessibility in mind, designing with people with disabilities in mind, it's not some unknown person who I don't think they even use my product. No, they use your products and they would want to use your products. And you're going to benefit a lot more of your users. So definitely those are some things I'd like for us to keep in mind. And I'd like to take a quick pause here. I'd love to hear, I'm going to leave the graphic on the screen again. So think about permanent, temporary, and situational in the different areas. What are some things that come to mind for you all? With things you all do on a day-to-day basis, what is one thing that comes to mind that, hey, maybe I can make this change and this is suddenly going to help more people? Or think of something that comes to mind with even products you've used. Are there any ideas that are coming through? Captions is something that has been talked about in the chat. Are there any other examples or thoughts that are coming through right now? Okay, so Nehar says screen reader, Chuck says colorblind friendly mode. I have a fun story on the colorblind one. Large clickable reasons, love that. I love that. Yeah, there's a lot of good ideas coming in, making sure you can customize. And customization is an interesting one that's being brought up, is making sure you're able to cater to different input needs, right? Like if someone had Parkinson and their hands shaking, you can't expect them to have a very small target size that you want them to click, right? That's going to make things very difficult. So really thinking of ways to expand that out, making sure more people can use it. Bigger icons, love that. I think Jeremy brings up a great point. Again, internet bandwidth is a big one for inclusivity as it can vary, absolutely. And if you're in low coverage area, so people don't account for that. Absolutely. Nehar also says she used an app that had bright pink all over it, hurting her eyes, no way to change to dark mode or anything else. Oh my goodness. I've had that happen with neon green, believe it or not. It's also interesting. So while we are adding examples, there's one thing, again, being vulnerable here, sharing my own personal experience. This is me as a design student. So I have a background, I have a master's in HCI. And I remember, again, I'm learning about accessibility. I'm still learning. I'm always going to be learning. We were in a user study. We were with a woman who was colorblind, but she also had partial blindness in one eye. And so we were just talking to her and, getting her feedback on our prototypes and designs. And something that we didn't know, that we learned very quickly, and never do this again, is this contrast between white and this green, right? Like this lime colored green with a white colored background. And the text wasn't very discernible. It was very difficult for her. And so it was very interesting because I bring up the prototype. I'm like, yeah, what feedback do you have about this? And she's like, what are you talking about? She couldn't see what I was trying as part of the prototype. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I just wish I can disappear right now. I wish I could erase the last 5 minutes of this. Like, how could we have done this? And the reason I share this story is to remind everyone that be kind to yourself and be kind to the others around you because you're all learning, right? Part of the learning and growing is going through these experiences where we all have our own biases and you might introduce some form of an exclusion that when you learn about it, you're like, oh my gosh, how could I have done it? Best way to respond to that is, hey, yes, I did it, but you know what? I'm not going to do it moving forward. And that's okay. That's your learning moment. I want everyone to remember that. And again, I share the story from my own personal experience of I've made mistakes, but I'm going to learn from them, right? We're all going to make those mistakes. So it doesn't mean that you don't jump in because you're so scared of making that mistake. I see this a lot with accessibility where people are so worried about screwing up or, offending someone or, making that mistake. But if you never take that first step, you'll never learn. You'll never grow. You'll not be able to make the world a more inclusive place because you were so scared of messing it up. Guess what? We're all messing it up. And the fact that you don't do anything is messing it up even more. So it's better to do something, learn from it, and then keep improving upon it. So as we all walk away, that's one thing I'm going to say this. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to the ones around you. We're all learning, and that's okay. That's definitely okay. And so bringing this back to going on to the next phase, right? As we've thought about research and we've thought about expanding it out, take a step back and think about your projects in the sense of, hey, what are my constraints? Who are my users, right? What methods can I learn? And what methods can I use to learn more about them? And will they give me the data I need? And what will I do with this? And am I making sure that every phase of my project, I'm thinking about accessibility? I'm being intentional. It's all about being intentional, right? Because if you think about accessibility as, I look at it like a cake, right? I love sweets. I'm a huge fan of that. You can't sprinkle in some flavoring towards the end and expect the cake to taste delicious, right? You have to make sure it's baked in. So accessibility is very similar. You need to make sure it's baked in and you're being very intentional about it. Whether it's your information architecture, whether it's your design reviews, whether it's your sprint planning, right? Whether it's exploratory research or whether it's evaluation, right? You build something and you're like, hey, can we test this out and make sure it's doing what it's doing? Yes, make sure you have accessibility there as well. So you have to get very, very intentional at every phase. When we think about specifically design and research, one thing that again comes to mind is when you're designing, make sure you're getting feedback with very inclusive groups, right? Making sure you're getting feedback from people with disabilities, because that's when you can get those insights and bake that information in. The other good one to do is understanding the controls, right? Like, okay, for this application I'm designing, is this going to be accessible with a screen reader? Am I able to use an assistive technology to navigate this? Can I operate this with voice instead of having to type? Have I provided different input modalities to make sure more folks can use it in different ways, right? And so really thinking about that is valuable. Just think of ways in which it's possible to be able to do that. And again, going back to being kind, there are going to be other constraints too, right? There's business constraints. You're not going to be able to do everything at the same time. And that's okay. Start small, celebrate those small wins. Start with the one thing that you can start changing and then go from there. Again, be intentional and don't get overwhelmed. Also going to quickly check the chat for other comments, other questions. I'm seeing the labels. That's great. Neha brings up a point. She says, customers usually use the product silently, and some of these suggestions sound like exclusive privileges. Neha, I'd love to address that in the Q&A. So I'd love to hear if you feel comfortable expanding on that. I'd definitely love to address that. Thank you for sharing. And finally, talking about implementation. Again, these are really basic, simplistic ones, right? But thinking about really easy ways, like are we thinking about headers, right? Are we thinking about actually developing your product? Are your headers laid out correctly? Are you thinking about your hierarchy? Are you thinking about how the information has been organized? Is it going to be easy for someone with a cognitive disability to parse through this? Are you throwing too much at them, right? Things like that. So there can be a million things to think about. But again, take a step back, start small, start with the one thing that you can start changing. I'd love to leave time for questions. And so I'm happy to end a tad bit early. I have a slide of resources and I'm happy to also share these through. And Rupa in the beginning of the call mentioned that that is one of my products. So I am the product owner for Accessibility Insights with Microsoft. That is free, that is open source, and it helps developers the goal is you as a developer don't have to remember everything that it comes with accessibility. We'll help you take care of it, and it helps you test for it. There's a lot of the products out there, and I've got a list of these. I'm happy to share these in the chat in a second as well.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Thank you, Nandita, for the brilliant presentation. This is such a wonderful topic, so important in today's world, whether we are working on websites, mobile apps, or any type of product. Thinking about people who have issues, problems, inclusive design is so important in today's world. Thank you once again, everyone. Good night.